the ZEIGARNIK effect and the power of unfinished tasks. The ZEIGARNIK effect is one of the most useful discoveries in psychology for anyone who wants to get more done and hold the attention of others. It refers to our tendency to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks far better than tasks we have finished. The mind seems to keep a task open and active until it reaches resolution, quietly nagging at us until the loop is closed. The effect is named after a researcher who noticed that waiters in a busy restaurant could remember complex unpaid orders with remarkable accuracy, but the moment the bill was paid, they forgot the details almost entirely. She then ran a series of experiments in which people were given simple tasks and interrupted partway through half of them. When asked later what they had worked on, participants remembered the interrupted tasks roughly twice as often as the completed ones. The unfinished work stayed lodged in memory while the finished work faded. Have you ever found it impossible to stop thinking about a television episode that ended on a cliffhanger, replaying it in your head all week until the next one aired? Or noticed that a conversation left unresolved after an argument keeps intruding on your thoughts, while conversations that ended cleanly are forgotten by morning? Think about a project you started but never finished, how it lingers at the back of your mind for months, generating a low hum of guilt, while the projects you completed have vanished from memory entirely. That nagging pull is the ZEIGARNIK effect keeping the loop open. You can use this to your advantage in powerful ways. When you sit down to work and find it hard to begin, simply start the task, even badly, for just a few minutes. Once the task is open in your mind, it becomes far harder to abandon, and you will feel drawn back to complete it. Writers use this by stopping mid-sentence, so that returning to work the next day feels effortless because the loop is already open. You can also use it to make yourself more memorable and more persuasive to others. When you tell a story, leave a small piece unresolved and promise to return to it, and people will pay closer attention and remember you longer. When you make a request, framing it as the completion of something already begun taps into the same drive toward closure. The unfinished, it turns out, holds far more power over the mind than the complete. The pratfall effect and the appeal of imperfection. The pratfall effect describes a surprising truth about how people come to like and trust us. It is the finding that competent people become more likable, not less, when they commit a small blunder, a minor mistake, a spilled drink, a fumbled word, humanizes an otherwise impressive person and makes others warm to them. Flawlessness, by contrast, can feel cold, intimidating, and hard to connect with. The effect was demonstrated in a classic study in which participants listened to recordings of a person answering quiz questions. In one version, the person performed brilliantly, and in another, they performed brilliantly, but then clumsily spilled a cup of coffee at the end. Participants consistently rated the competent person who spilled the coffee as more likable than the flawless one. The blunder made the high performer more relatable and more human, while adding the same spill to a mediocre performer only made them seem worse. Have you ever noticed that you feel more comfortable around a talented colleague after they admit they burned dinner or got lost on the way to work? Or that the polished, perfect person at a party feels strangely unapproachable, while the equally accomplished one who trips over a rug becomes instantly endearing? Think about the public figures you find most likable, and you will often notice they are the ones willing to laugh at their own small failings rather than projecting an airbrushed image of perfection. You can use the pratfall effect by allowing yourself to be seen as human, especially when you are in a position of competence or authority. If you are clearly skilled, a small, genuine admission of a minor flaw or mistake will make people trust and like you more, not less. Sharing a light self-aware story about a small failure can dissolve the distance that competence creates. The crucial condition is that the pratfall only works if your competence is already established. A blunder from someone who has not yet proven themselves simply reads as incompetence. So demonstrate your capability first, and then let your humanity show through a small imperfection. The combination of evident skill and visible humanity is one of the most magnetic and trustworthy impressions a person can make. The Benjamin Cognitive Ease Principle. Cognitive ease refers to the mental state we are in when things feel effortless, familiar, and easy to process. When information is easy for the brain to take in, we tend to judge it as more true, more likable, and more trustworthy. When information is hard to process, we become more skeptical, more analytical, and more resistant. Understanding this gives you enormous power over how your ideas are received. Researchers have shown that the mere fluency with which something is processed changes how we evaluate it. In studies, statements printed in clear, easy-to-read fonts were judged as more truthful than the identical statements printed in hard-to-read fonts. Rhyming phrases were rated as more accurate than non-rhyming versions of the same idea, simply because the rhyme made them flow more smoothly through the mind. Even the ease of pronouncing a name affected how favorably people judged the person or company bearing it. Have you ever felt an instinctive trust toward a slogan that rhymed, or a message written in simple, clean language, and a vague suspicion toward a densely worded document full of jargon? Or notice that you are more comfortable with brands whose names are easy to say aloud? Think about how a well-designed, uncluttered presentation feels credible before you have even evaluated its content, while a cramped, chaotic one makes you doubt everything in it. You can harness cognitive ease by making your ideas as easy to process as possible. Speak clearly and simply. Write in short, clean sentences. Use familiar words rather than complex ones when you want to be believed and liked. Repeat your key message because repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds ease, and ease breeds trust. There is, however, a flip side worth knowing. When you want people to think carefully and catch their own errors, introducing a little difficulty can help. Making something slightly harder to read forces the mind into a more careful, analytical mode. But for most situations where you want to persuade, be liked, and be believed, smoothness is your ally. Make it easy, and the mind will reward you with trust. The spotlight effect and freeing yourself from self-consciousness. The spotlight effect is the tendency to overestimate how much other people notice and judge us. We feel as though we are constantly under a spotlight, with everyone observing our appearance, our mistakes, and our awkward moments, when in reality, people are far too absorbed in their own concerns to pay us nearly as much attention as we imagine. Recognizing this can liberate you from a great deal of social fear. In a memorable study, researchers asked participants to wear an embarrassing t-shirt and walk into a room full of people. Afterward, the participants estimated that about half the people in the room had noticed the shirt. In reality, only a small fraction had noticed at all, roughly a quarter of what the wearers expected. The participants had dramatically overestimated how much attention was directed at them, imagining a spotlight that simply was not there. Have you ever spent an entire evening worrying that everyone had noticed a stain on your shirt or a stumble in your speech, only to realize later that no one remembered it at all? Or replayed an awkward comment in your head for days, certain that others were still thinking about it, when they had forgotten it within seconds? Think about how little you actually remember of other people's small blunders, and then consider that they remember yours just as little. You can use this understanding to act with greater freedom and confidence. When you feel paralyzed by the fear of being judged, remind yourself that the spotlight you feel is mostly an illusion, and that everyone around you is far more preoccupied with their own spotlight than with you. This frees you to take risks, to speak up, to approach people, and to try new things without the crushing weight of imagined scrutiny. The spotlight effect also gives you compassion and strategic insight. Since everyone is starring in their own show and worrying about their own image, you can win enormous goodwill simply by taking the focus off yourself and shining a little attention on others. When you release your own self-consciousness, you become more present, more generous, and more magnetic, precisely because you are no longer trapped beneath a spotlight that was never really there. The Hawthorne effect and the power of being watched. The Hawthorne effect describes the way people change their behavior, usually for the better, simply because they know they are being observed. When we feel that someone is watching or paying attention to our performance, we work harder, behave more carefully, and hold ourselves to a higher standard, often without consciously deciding to. Observation itself, independent of any reward or punishment, improves behavior. The effect takes its name from a series of famous studies conducted at a factory called the Hawthorne Works, where researchers set out to test how changes in working conditions, such as lighting, affected productivity. To their surprise, productivity improved almost no matter what they changed, even when conditions were returned to their original state. The workers were not responding to the lighting. They were responding to the attention itself, performing better because they knew they were being studied and someone cared about what they did. Have you ever noticed that you work with far more focus at a library or cafe, surrounded by people who might glance at your screen, than alone at home where no one can see you? Or found that simply telling a friend about your goal made you far more likely to follow through, because now someone was watching? Think about how differently people drive when a police car is behind them, or how much tidier your work becomes when you know it will be reviewed. The watching eye, real or imagined, sharpens us. You can use the Hawthorne effect deliberately to improve your own performance. Build observation into your goals by sharing them with others, working alongside people, hiring a coach, joining a group, or even just tracking and reviewing your own behavior, which creates a form of self-observation. When you know your actions will be seen by others or by your own recorded data, you naturally rise to a higher standard without needing to summon extra willpower. You can also use this principle to bring out the best in others, though it must be done with care. Genuine attention and interest in people's work tends to lift their performance, not because they fear punishment, but because attention communicates that what they do matters. The difference between motivating observation and oppressive surveillance lies in the spirit of it. Attention that says your work is important elevates people, while attention that says we do not trust you diminishes them. Used well, the simple act of caring enough to watch and letting people know their efforts are seen is one of the easiest and most powerful ways to raise the level of everything around you. The chameleon effect of unconscious imitation. The chameleon effect describes our natural unconscious tendency to imitate the postures, gestures, expressions, and mannerisms of the people we interact with. This mimicry happens automatically, below the level of awareness, and it serves a deep social purpose. When we mirror someone, we feel more connected to them, and they feel more connected to us, creating a smooth and pleasant bond. Researchers demonstrated this by having a confederate subtly mimic the behaviors of participants during a conversation, rubbing their face or shaking their foot in imitation. Participants who were mimicked reported liking the confederate more and finding the interaction smoother, even though they had no idea any mimicry had occurred. In further studies, mimicry increased helpfulness, generosity, and cooperation. People who had been subtly imitated became measurably kinder and more agreeable toward the person who imitated them. Have you ever noticed that when you are getting along wonderfully with someone, you naturally end up sitting the same way, using the same phrases, or laughing at the same moments? Or felt an inexplicable ease with a person whose energy and gestures seem to match your own? Think about how quickly a conversation flows when two people fall into the same rhythm, leaning in together, pausing together, mirroring each other, without either of them planning it. You can use the chameleon effect to build rapport gently and naturally. When you want to connect with someone, subtly adopt aspects of their body language, their pace of speech, and their energy level. If they speak slowly and calmly, do the same. If they are animated and expressive, match a little of that energy. Done with subtlety and warmth, this mirroring creates an unconscious sense of similarity and trust. The key word is subtlety. Obvious, mechanical mimicry feels mocking and creates the opposite of rapport. The goal is not to copy someone move for move, but to gently attune yourself to their rhythm, the way two people naturally do when they genuinely connect. When you attune to another person in this way, you create the felt sense of being on the same wavelength, and that feeling is one of the strongest foundations of influence and friendship. The peak-end rule and designing memorable experiences. The peak-end rule reveals a strange truth about how we remember experiences. We do not remember an experience as the sum or average of every moment within it. Instead, our memory of an experience is dominated by two moments: its most intense point, whether pleasant or unpleasant, and its ending. Everything else, including how long the experience lasted, fades into insignificance in our recollection. This was shown in a series of studies on how people remember pain and pleasure. In one experiment, participants underwent an uncomfortable procedure, and one group had the discomfort extended for extra time at a milder level at the very end. Logically, the extended version contained more total discomfort. Yet participants remembered it as less unpleasant because it ended more gently. The improved ending reshaped the entire memory, despite adding more suffering overall. The duration of the experience barely registered, a phenomenon known as duration neglect. Have you ever remembered a vacation as wonderful because of one magical afternoon and a perfect final evening, even though much of the trip was stressful or dull? Or judged an entire meal by a spectacular dessert, forgetting a mediocre main course? Think about how a relationship that ended badly can color your memory of years that were mostly happy, the painful ending overshadowing everything that came before. You can use the peak-end rule to design experiences that people will remember fondly. Whether you are hosting an event, delivering a presentation, or building a relationship, focus your energy on creating at least one powerful peak and a strong, positive ending. A good finish can redeem an average experience, while a weak ending can spoil an otherwise excellent one. This principle applies to every interaction you have. End meetings on a high note. Conclude conversations warmly. Finish a piece of work with a memorable flourish. Since people's lasting impression is shaped so heavily by peaks and endings, a little deliberate attention to those two moments can transform how you and your experiences are remembered, out of all proportion to the effort involved. The mere exposure effect and the power of familiarity. The mere exposure effect is the tendency to develop a preference for things simply because we have encountered them before. The more often we are exposed to something, whether a face, a word, a melody, or an idea, the more we tend to like it, even without any positive experience attached. Familiarity, all by itself, breeds affection. Research has demonstrated this by showing participants nonsense words, unfamiliar symbols, and photographs of strangers' faces various numbers of times. The items that people saw most frequently were the ones they later rated most positively, even though they had no memory of having seen them more often. In one striking version, people preferred the mirror image of their own face, the version they see in the mirror every day, while their friends preferred the version seen in photographs, each favoring the familiar orientation. Have you ever found that a song you initially disliked grew on you until you loved it, simply through repeated hearing? Or noticed that you feel warmly toward the barista or neighbor you see every day, even though you have never had a real conversation? Think about how a new colleague can go from stranger to trusted friend through nothing more than repeated, low-key exposure over weeks and months. You can use the mere exposure effect to build relationships and acceptance patiently over time. If you want someone to like you, find natural ways to be present and visible in their world, showing up consistently and pleasantly without forcing interaction. Familiarity accumulates quietly, and over time, mere presence becomes preference. The same principle helps ideas gain acceptance. A proposal that seems strange on first hearing often becomes reasonable after people have encountered it a few times. This is why introducing a new idea gradually, letting people sit with it and hear it repeated, works better than demanding immediate agreement. Just be aware that exposure amplifies whatever feeling already exists. If a first impression is negative, more exposure can deepen the dislike. But when the starting point is neutral or positive, familiarity is one of the gentlest and most reliable paths to being liked and accepted. The endowment effect and ownership psychology. The endowment effect is the tendency to value something more highly simply because we own it. The moment an object becomes ours, we begin to see it as more valuable and become reluctant to part with it, often demanding far more to give it up than we would ever have paid to acquire it. Ownership itself, it turns out, inflates worth in our eyes. In a classic experiment, researchers gave half the participants a coffee mug and left the other half without one. They then let people buy and sell the mugs. Those who owned a mug demanded, on average, about twice as much money to sell it as the buyers were willing to pay. The mug had not changed. Only the fact of ownership had, and that alone roughly doubled its perceived value. This gap between what owners demand and what buyers will offer appears again and again across many kinds of goods. Have you ever tried to sell something you owned and found yourself baffled that buyers would not pay what it was obviously worth to you? Or noticed how hard it is to give away old possessions, even ones you never use, because letting go feels like a loss? Think about how a free trial makes you reluctant to cancel, because once you have been using something, it already feels like yours to lose. You can use the endowment effect to make offers more compelling. Letting people try, hold, or temporarily possess something creates a sense of ownership that makes them reluctant to give it back. This is why test drives, free trials, and take-it-home offers are so effective. Once people feel that something is theirs, parting with it registers as a painful loss, and the fear of loss is a powerful motivator. You can also use awareness of this effect to make better decisions yourself. Recognize that your reluctance to let go of possessions, positions, or even opinions may stem not from their true value, but from the simple fact that they are yours. Asking whether you would acquire something at its current price if you did not already own it can cut through the distortion and reveal what things are actually worth to you. The power of temptation bundling. Temptation bundling is the strategy of pairing something you need to do but tend to avoid with something you love to do, but perhaps indulge in too much. By linking the two, allowing yourself the indulgence only while doing the difficult task, you transform dreaded activities into ones you almost look forward to, and you convert guilty pleasures into fuel for productive behavior. The temptation pulls you into the task. Researchers demonstrated this in a study on exercise, in which participants were given audio versions of gripping page-turner novels that they were only allowed to enjoy at the gym. Compared to people who were free to listen anytime, those whose tempting audiobooks were bundled with workouts attended the gym significantly more often. The desire to find out what happened next in the story literally pulled them into exercising. The temptation, rationed and tied to the behavior, became an engine of discipline rather than a distraction from it. Have you ever saved your favorite podcast for long drives you would otherwise dread and found yourself almost welcoming the commute? Or allowed yourself to watch your favorite show only while folding laundry or using the exercise bike, and noticed that chores you once avoided began to feel like treats? Think about how much easier a difficult task becomes when it is the exclusive gateway to a pleasure you have been craving, and how the pleasure feels sweeter when it is earned. You can use temptation bundling by making two lists, one of tasks you avoid but need to do, and one of pleasures you love and perhaps overindulge in, and then pairing them so that the pleasure is only allowed during the task. Save the addictive series for the treadmill. Reserve the special coffee for tackling your hardest work. Allow the beloved music only while cleaning. The rule of exclusivity is what gives the bundle its power, since a treat available anytime pulls you away from work, while a treat available only during work pulls you toward it. The genius of this strategy is that it stops treating willpower as a battle between what you should do and what you want to do, and instead makes desire an ally of discipline. Rather than exhausting yourself resisting temptation and forcing virtue, you engineer your habits so that temptation and virtue arrive together, each strengthening the other. In a world where most people see their cravings as the enemy of their goals, the person who learns to harness cravings in service of their goals holds a quiet, sustainable advantage in the long game of self-improvement. The bandwagon effect and momentum. The bandwagon effect is the tendency for people to adopt beliefs, behaviors, and choices because they perceive that others, especially many others, are already doing so. The more a thing appears to be catching on, the more people want to join, creating a self-reinforcing wave of adoption. We are drawn to jump aboard whatever seems to be moving and growing. This effect has been demonstrated in countless domains, from voting behavior to product adoption to the spread of ideas. In studies of online behavior, articles and products that displayed high engagement numbers attracted far more engagement, while identical content shown without those numbers languished. When people believe something is popular and gaining momentum, they assume it must have value, and they climb aboard, which makes it even more popular in a cycle that feeds itself. Have you ever chosen a busy restaurant over an empty one, assuming the crowd meant the food was better? Or found yourself suddenly interested in a book, show, or trend precisely because everyone around you seemed to be talking about it? Think about how a cause or movement can seem to appear from nowhere and sweep everyone up, not because the underlying facts changed, but because the sense of momentum became irresistible. You can use the bandwagon effect by highlighting genuine momentum and growing support for your ideas or endeavors. When you can honestly show that something is catching on, that more and more people are embracing it, you make it easier for others to join. Framing an idea as a growing movement rather than a lonely position gives people the reassurance that they will not be stepping out alone. You should also recognize the bandwagon effect operating on you, so you can resist it when appropriate. Popularity is not the same as merit, and momentum can carry both good and bad ideas. When you feel the pull to join something simply because it is spreading, pause and ask whether you actually believe in it or are merely being swept along. The wisest people know how to ride useful waves while stepping off harmful ones, and that requires seeing the bandwagon effect clearly rather than being unconsciously carried by it. The generation effect and learning by creating. The generation effect is the finding that we remember information far better when we generate it ourselves than when we merely read or receive it. The act of producing an answer, a word, a solution, or an idea from our own minds, even with effort and even imperfectly, carves it into memory far more deeply than passively consuming the same information ever could. What we create, we keep. Researchers demonstrated this in experiments where people either read pairs of words or generated the second word themselves from a clue, such as completing a fragment. When tested later, those who had generated the words remembered them dramatically better than those who had simply read them, even though both groups had encountered exactly the same material. The small effort of producing the answer, rather than receiving it, transformed how firmly it lodged in memory. This finding has been repeated across many kinds of material, from vocabulary to facts to problem solutions. Have you ever noticed that you remember the route you figured out yourself far better than the one you were passively guided along by navigation? Or that the facts you struggle to recall before looking them up stick with you, while the ones you instantly searched for vanish by the next day? Think about how much more you learned from solving a problem yourself, even slowly and painfully, than from watching someone else present the solution smoothly. You can use the generation effect to learn anything faster and more durably. Instead of rereading notes or passively watching explanations, close the book and try to produce the material yourself, testing yourself, summarizing from memory, explaining the idea aloud in your own words, or attempting the problem before looking at the solution. The effort of generation, including the struggle and the mistakes, is not a sign of poor learning, but the very mechanism by which deep learning happens. You can also use this principle when teaching or persuading others. People remember and believe what they generate themselves far more than what they are told. So asking questions that lead others to produce the insight in their own minds is far more powerful than simply stating it. A conclusion. Someone reaches themselves, feels like their own discovery, and is defended like their own possession. Whether you are mastering a skill, preparing for an exam, or helping others learn and change, the principle is the same. Do not just consume and do not just tell. Generate and invite others to generate, because the mind holds hardest to what it has made. The fresh start effect and temporal landmarks. The fresh start effect describes how certain moments in time make us feel like we are turning a page, and how this feeling powerfully boosts our motivation to pursue goals. Dates that mark new beginnings, such as the start of a year, a month, a week, a birthday, or any meaningful landmark, create a psychological break from our past selves and make us more willing to strive toward who we want to become. Researchers studied this by examining when people were most likely to begin pursuing goals, from searching for gym memberships to setting up commitments to change. They found clear spikes in motivation following temporal landmarks, the beginning of a new week, the start of a month, the first day of a semester, and especially the new year. These moments allowed people to mentally separate an imperfect past self from an aspirational future self, and that separation freed them to try again. Have you ever felt a surge of determination on a Monday morning or the first of the month, resolving that this was the moment things would change? Or found it easier to start a new habit on a birthday or after a significant date, as though the calendar itself had given you permission to begin again? Think about how a fresh start, even an arbitrary one, can wipe away the discouragement of past failures and restore the sense that a better version of you is possible. You can use the fresh start effect deliberately to launch and sustain your goals. Instead of trying to change on a random Wednesday when you feel discouraged, time your new beginnings to align with meaningful landmarks that give you a sense of a clean slate. You can even create your own landmarks, such as the start of a new project, a move, or a personal anniversary, to manufacture the motivating feeling of a fresh start whenever you need it. You can also use this to help others begin. Framing a change as part of a new chapter, a new season, or a new beginning makes it feel more achievable and less burdened by past failures. The knowledge that we can always draw a line and start fresh, and that certain moments make that line easier to draw, is one of the most quietly powerful tools for personal change and for motivating those around you. The curse of knowledge and communicating clearly. The curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that makes it difficult for people who know something to imagine what it is like not to know it. Once we understand a concept deeply, we lose the ability to see it through the eyes of a beginner, and this makes us worse communicators, because we assume others share knowledge they simply do not have. The effect was captured beautifully in a study where participants were asked to tap out the rhythm of well-known songs on a table while listeners tried to guess the tune. The tappers predicted that listeners would identify the songs about half the time. In reality, listeners guessed correctly only about 1 in 40 times. The tappers could hear the full song in their heads, complete with melody and lyrics, and simply could not imagine that the listeners heard nothing but a series of disconnected taps. Have you ever listened to an expert explain something and left more confused than when you started because they used terms and assumptions you did not share? Or tried to explain something obvious to you and grown frustrated that the other person just was not getting it, when the real problem was that you skipped the steps that were invisible to you but essential to them? Think about how hard it is to give directions in your own neighborhood, where every landmark is so familiar that you forget a newcomer sees none of it. You can overcome the curse of knowledge by consciously stepping into the mind of your listener. Assume less shared knowledge than feels natural. Define your terms, explain your steps, and check for understanding rather than assuming it. The clearest communicators are not those who know the most, but those who best remember what it was like not to know. This skill is invaluable in every area of life, from teaching and leadership to sales and friendship. When you can translate what you know into language that meets people exactly where they are, you become vastly more persuasive and helpful. The person who can make the complex feel simple, who can bridge the gap between their own knowledge and another's ignorance without condescension, holds a rare and powerful advantage. The autonomy of the because justification. There is a small linguistic key that unlocks cooperation in others, and it lies in the simple word because. When we accompany a request with a reason, even a weak or almost meaningless one, people become far more willing to comply. The word because signals that a justification is coming, and the mind is primed to accept requests that appear to be reasoned rather than arbitrary. A request with a reason attached feels legitimate, even when the reason itself is hollow. Researchers demonstrated this with a now famous experiment involving a line of people waiting to use a copy machine. When someone asked to cut in front simply by requesting it, a modest number agreed. But when the person added a reason, saying they needed to make copies because they were in a rush, compliance jumped dramatically. Astonishingly, when they gave an utterly empty reason, saying they needed to make copies because they had to make copies, compliance remained almost as high. The mere presence of the word because and the form of a justification did most of the work. Have you ever noticed that a request accompanied by any explanation feels more reasonable and easier to grant than a bare demand? Or found yourself more willing to accommodate someone who told you why they were asking, even when the reason was not especially compelling? Think about how a simple explanation, however minor, transforms a request from an arbitrary imposition into a reasonable ask that you feel comfortable granting. You can use the power of because by always providing a reason when you make a request, rather than simply asking for what you want, attach a justification, ideally a genuine and compelling one, but at minimum a real reason that frames your request as reasonable. This small addition significantly increases the likelihood that people will say yes, because it satisfies the mind's desire for requests to make sense. The ethical version of this principle is simply good communication. People deserve to know why you are asking something of them, and providing real reasons respects their intelligence and autonomy, while making cooperation easier. When your reasons are genuine and strong, the effect is even more powerful, combining the psychological pull of justification with the actual merit of your case. In a world where many people bark demands without explanation, the person who consistently frames requests with clear, honest reasons finds cooperation flowing far more freely. The small word because and the justification it introduces is one of the simplest and most reliable keys to willing agreement. The focusing illusion and what truly matters. The focusing illusion is the tendency to overestimate the importance of whatever we happen to be thinking about at the moment. When we focus our attention on any single factor, it looms unnaturally large in our judgment, and we exaggerate its impact on our happiness or success while ignoring everything else. As one researcher put it, nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. This was demonstrated in studies where people were asked how much happier they thought residents of sunny climates were compared to those in cold ones. People assumed a large difference, focusing on the pleasant weather. But when actual happiness was measured, the difference nearly vanished, because sunshine is only one small part of a life, and residents of both climates spent most of their time thinking about work, relationships, and daily concerns rather than the weather. The focus on climate created an illusion of its importance. Have you ever been convinced that one particular change, a new job, a bigger house, a certain purchase, would transform your happiness, only to find that after a brief lift, life felt much as it did before? Or noticed that whatever problem currently occupies your mind feels like the most important thing in the world, until it is resolved and something else takes its place? Think about how a single flaw in an otherwise good situation can consume your attention and distort your whole view of it. You can use awareness of the focusing illusion to make wiser decisions and to feel more content. When you find yourself certain that one factor will make or break your happiness, step back and remember that its importance is inflated by your focus on it. Broadening your attention to the full picture of your life restores a truer sense of proportion. You can also use this understanding to influence others gently by being aware of what you direct their attention toward. Whatever you make people focus on will seem more important to them than it truly is. Used ethically, this means helping people focus on what genuinely matters and on the positive aspects of a situation. Used on yourself, it means learning to lift your gaze from the single worry or desire that dominates the moment and to see your life whole, which is one of the great secrets of a steady and grateful mind. The sunk cost fallacy and knowing when to walk away. The sunk cost fallacy is the tendency to continue investing in something simply because we have already invested in it, even when doing so no longer makes sense. Past investments of money, time, or effort, which cannot be recovered, wrongly pull us toward throwing good resources after bad. We feel that to quit now would waste everything we have already put in, and so we press on toward loss. Researchers have shown this in many forms. In one study, people who had paid for a ski trip to one destination and a better ski trip to another, scheduled on the same weekend, chose to attend the more expensive but less enjoyable trip, purely to avoid feeling they had wasted the larger sum. The rational choice was the better trip, but the larger sunk cost dragged them toward the worse experience. Businesses, governments, and individuals repeatedly pour resources into failing ventures for no better reason than that they have already spent so much. Have you ever sat through a terrible movie to the end simply because you paid for the ticket when leaving would have freed your evening? Or stayed in a job, a project, or a relationship long after it stopped serving you because you had already invested so many years? Think about how the phrase "we have come too far to quit now" can trap people in courses of action that grow worse with every passing day. You can free yourself from the sunk cost fallacy by learning to evaluate decisions based only on the future, not the past. The money, time, and effort you have already spent are gone regardless of what you do next. The only real question is whether continuing will produce good outcomes from this point forward. When you train yourself to ignore sunk costs and focus purely on future value, you make far wiser choices and escape the trap of loyalty to lost causes. You can also recognize when others are caught in this fallacy and help them, or account for it, with compassion. People cling fiercely to failing paths because abandoning them feels like admitting waste. Framing a change not as giving up on the past, but as making the best possible choice for the future, can help people let go. The ability to cut losses cleanly, to walk away from what is no longer working without being chained by what you have already spent, is one of the most valuable and freeing skills a person can develop. The confirmation bias in yourself and others. Confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe, while ignoring or dismissing information that contradicts it. We are not the neutral, rational evaluators of evidence we imagine ourselves to be. Instead, we act like lawyers building a case for our existing views, gathering support and explaining away anything that threatens them. The bias has been demonstrated in countless studies. In one, participants who held opposing views on a controversial topic were shown the same mixed set of evidence. Rather than moving toward the middle, both sides became more entrenched, seizing on the evidence that supported them and finding reasons to reject the rest. Each group left more convinced than before, having used the identical information to strengthen opposite conclusions. We do not weigh evidence fairly. We recruit it for the side we have already chosen. Have you ever noticed that once you form an opinion about a person, you start collecting evidence that they are exactly as you believed, while overlooking everything that does not fit? Or found that your view on a topic seems constantly confirmed by what you read and hear, in part because you gravitate towards sources that already agree with you. Think about how two people can watch the same event and each come away certain that it proved their side right. You can use awareness of confirmation bias to think far more clearly than most people. Deliberately seek out information and perspectives that challenge your beliefs. Ask what evidence would prove you wrong and go looking for it honestly. When you make a decision, actively argue the opposing case to yourself. This discipline of seeking disconfirmation, rather than comfort, is the foundation of good judgment. Understanding this bias in others also makes you more persuasive and less frustrated. Simply presenting people with facts that contradict their beliefs often backfires because they dismiss the facts and dig in deeper. Instead, meeting people where they are, acknowledging their perspective, and helping them arrive at new conclusions on their own works far better. When you understand that everyone, including you, is prone to seeing what they expect to see, you become both a wiser thinker and a more effective communicator. The availability heuristic and the vividness trap. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut in which we judge how likely or common something is based on how easily examples come to mind. Events that are vivid, recent, or emotionally striking spring to mind readily, and so we overestimate their frequency, while dull or unmemorable events, however common, fade from our estimates. We mistake the ease of recall for the truth of frequency. Researchers demonstrated this by asking people whether more words begin with the letter K or have K as their third letter. Most people said more words begin with K because such words are far easier to bring to mind. In reality, many more words have K in the third position, but those are much harder to recall on demand. The ease of remembering the first group led people to overestimate its size, a clean illustration of the availability heuristic at work. Have you ever felt more afraid of a rare but dramatic danger, like a plane crash, than of a far more common but mundane one, like a car accident, simply because the dramatic danger dominates the news and the imagination? Or judged a whole city as dangerous because of one vivid story you heard, ignoring the millions of uneventful days? Think about how a single memorable experience can shape your entire sense of how the world works, out of all proportion to its actual likelihood. You can use awareness of the availability heuristic to make more rational assessments of risk and probability. When you notice a strong feeling that something is common or likely, ask whether that feeling comes from real evidence or merely from how easily vivid examples come to mind. Seeking actual data, rather than relying on the drama of memory, protects you from being ruled by fear or by misleading impressions. You can also use this understanding to communicate more powerfully, since vivid, concrete, memorable examples influence people far more than dry statistics. A single, well-told story often moves people more than a mountain of data, precisely because it is easy to recall and picture. Used ethically, this means illustrating true and important points with vivid examples that make them stick, while being honest about the underlying reality rather than exploiting the vividness trap to distort it. The primacy effect and first impressions that last. The primacy effect is the tendency for the first pieces of information we receive to carry disproportionate weight in shaping our overall impression. What comes first sets the frame through which we interpret everything that follows. Early information does not simply add to our judgment, it colors and distorts all the later information, bending it to fit the initial impression. This was demonstrated in a classic study where participants were given lists of adjectives describing a person. One group heard the person described as intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. Another group heard the identical traits in reverse order, beginning with the negative ones. Even though the words were exactly the same, the group that heard the positive traits first formed a far more favorable impression. The order alone, with its powerful first words, reshaped the entire judgment. Have you ever formed a strong impression of someone in the first few seconds of meeting them, and then found that everything they did afterward seemed to confirm that impression, whether good or bad? Or notice that when you learn something positive about a person first, you interpret their later behavior generously, while an early negative note makes you view the same behavior with suspicion. Think about how much a strong or weak opening shapes your view of a book, a speech, or a meal long before you have experienced the whole. You can use the primacy effect by investing heavily in strong beginnings. The opening of a meeting, a presentation, a conversation, or a relationship carries far more weight than its length would suggest. Leading with your strongest, most positive material sets a frame that works in your favor throughout everything that follows. The primacy effect also teaches patience and fairness in your own judgments of others. Since your first impressions carry so much weight and resist revision, you can consciously hold them loosely, remaining open to evidence that your initial read was wrong. By recognizing how powerfully the first impression shapes everything after it, you can both craft better beginnings for yourself and avoid being unfairly locked into early judgments of the people you meet. The recency effect and ending strong. The recency effect is the counterpart to the primacy effect, describing how the most recent information we receive also carries special weight because it is freshest in our minds. While first impressions frame our judgments, last impressions linger, and the final note of an experience often lasts longest in memory. What we encounter most recently is what we most easily recall. Researchers studying memory found that when people are given a list of items to remember, they recall the first few items well, thanks to the primacy effect, and the last few items well, thanks to the recency effect, while the middle items are most easily forgotten. This pattern, with strong memory for beginnings and endings, and weak memory for the middle, appears reliably across many kinds of information and experiences. Have you ever judged an entire conversation by its final few moments, walking away warmly because it ended on a laugh, or coldly because it ended on a sour note? Or found that the last thing someone said to you sticks in your mind far more than everything that came before? Think about how the closing moments of an interview, a date, or a performance can shape the lasting impression more than the long stretch in the middle. You can use the recency effect by paying careful attention to how you end things. Since the final moments carry outsized weight in memory, closing an interaction, a message, or an experience on a strong, warm, memorable note pays lasting dividends. A powerful ending can lift the memory of an entire experience, while a weak or awkward ending can undermine everything good that preceded it. Combined with the primacy effect, the recency effect gives you a clear strategy for structuring anything you want people to remember well. Lead with strength to set the frame, and finish with strength to leave a lasting impression, while placing any weaker or less important material in the middle, where it is least likely to be remembered. Beginnings and endings are the moments that echo, so pour your energy into making them count. The overjustification effect and protecting inner motivation. The overjustification effect is the surprising discovery that rewarding people for activities they already enjoy can actually destroy their enjoyment of those activities. When an external reward is attached to something we do for its own sake, our minds reinterpret the behavior, concluding that we must be doing it for the reward rather than for love, and the inner motivation quietly dies. Pay someone for their passion carelessly, and you can extinguish the passion itself. Researchers demonstrated this in a famous study with young children who loved drawing. Some children were promised a shiny certificate for drawing, others received nothing. When observed later during free time, the children who had been rewarded for drawing now drew far less than before, while the unrewarded children drew as eagerly as ever. The reward had transformed drawing from play into work in the children's minds. Once the activity became something one does for a prize, it lost its inherent joy, and without the prize, the behavior faded. Have you ever loved a hobby, then turned it into a job or a source of obligation, and felt the love mysteriously drain away? Or noticed that a child eager to help becomes less helpful once helping is tied to payment, now negotiating for rewards where they once acted from the heart? Think about how an activity you did purely for joy changes the moment it is measured, graded, and rewarded. How the external scoreboard can crowd out the internal delight. You can use awareness of the overjustification effect to protect your own motivation. Guard the activities you love from being completely taken over by external rewards and metrics. When you do attach rewards to your pursuits, keep sight of the deeper reasons you care about them, and regularly reconnect with the enjoyment itself rather than only the outcomes. Some of your passions may be worth deliberately keeping free from monetization and measurement, preserved as sources of pure joy. You can also apply this wisdom in motivating others, especially children and teens. Rely on external rewards mainly for tasks that hold no inherent interest, and be careful about heaping rewards on what people already love to do. Instead, for intrinsically motivated people, provide recognition of their skill, autonomy in how they work, and appreciation that supports rather than replaces their inner drive. Unexpected appreciation after the fact tends to preserve intrinsic motivation far better than promised payments before. The deepest and most sustainable motivation comes from within, and the wise person learns to nurture that flame in themselves and in others, rather than smothering it beneath a pile of prizes. The power of expectations and the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect is the phenomenon whereby the expectations we hold about people influence how those people actually perform. When we expect more of someone, they tend to rise to meet that expectation, and when we expect little, they tend to sink toward it. Our beliefs about others become, in part, self-fulfilling prophecies, shaping the very reality we thought we were merely observing. The effect was famously demonstrated in a study in a school where teachers were told that certain randomly chosen students were expected to bloom academically that year. These students had been selected at random and were no different from their peers. Yet by the end of the year, the students their teachers expected to excel actually showed greater gains. The teachers, believing in these students, unconsciously gave them more attention, warmth, and encouragement, and the students responded by living up to the belief. Have you ever performed better for a boss, coach, or mentor who clearly believed in you, feeling their confidence lift your own? Or shrunk under the gaze of someone who expected you to fail, finding yourself fulfilling their low opinion? Think about how a teacher who saw promise in you may have changed the course of your life, simply by treating you as capable, while a dismissive one may have quietly convinced you of limits that were never real. You can use the Pygmalion effect to bring out the best in the people around you. When you hold and communicate genuine high expectations, treating people as capable, trustworthy, and full of potential, you create conditions in which they are more likely to become exactly that. Your belief in others, expressed through your attention and encouragement, becomes a gift that helps them grow. This is one of the most powerful tools available to any leader, parent, teacher, or friend. People tend to become who we treat them as being. By choosing to see and speak to the best in others, rather than the worst, you not only build stronger relationships, but actively help create better outcomes. And the reverse is a warning worth heeding, for low expectations and constant doubt can quietly diminish people. Expect the best, express it sincerely, and you will often find that people rise to meet the vision you hold of them. The chunking of information for memory and influence. Chunking is the technique of grouping individual pieces of information into larger, meaningful units, dramatically increasing how much the mind can hold and process. Our working memory can juggle only a handful of separate items at once, but by combining items into chunks, we can pack far more information into the same limited space. Mastering chunking makes you both a better learner and a clearer communicator. Research has established that the mind can hold only a small number of independent items in working memory at once, a limit famously described as around 7, and later research suggested even fewer. But this limit applies to chunks, not raw items. A string of 10 random digits is nearly impossible to hold, but grouped into meaningful chunks, such as a familiar phone number pattern, the same digits become easy. Experts in every field succeed partly by chunking, seeing meaningful patterns where novices see only scattered details. Have you ever noticed that you remember a phone number as a few groups rather than a long string of separate digits? Or found a long, complex idea far easier to grasp once someone broke it into a few clear categories? Think about how a skilled chess player sees the board not as 32 separate pieces, but as a handful of meaningful formations, allowing them to hold and reason about far more than a beginner could. You can use chunking to learn faster and remember more. When faced with a large amount of information, organize it into meaningful groups rather than trying to absorb it as a flat list. Find the patterns, categories, and structures that let you hold many details within a few chunks. This transforms overwhelming material into something manageable and memorable. You can also use chunking to communicate with far greater impact. When you present information to others, organize it into a small number of clear, meaningful groups rather than overwhelming them with scattered points. Telling people you have 3 key things to share and then delivering 3 well-defined chunks is enormously easier to follow and remember than an undifferentiated flood of information. By respecting the limits of working memory and packaging your ideas into digestible chunks, you make yourself clearer, more persuasive, and easier to remember. The negativity bias and managing impressions. The negativity bias is the tendency for negative experiences, information, and impressions to affect us more strongly than positive ones of equal intensity. Bad news, criticism, and unpleasant events grab our attention, stick in our memory, and shape our judgments far more powerfully than good news, praise, and pleasant events. Our minds are wired to weigh the negative more heavily, a legacy of a past in which missing a threat was deadlier than missing an opportunity. Researchers have documented this bias across many domains. Studies of relationships found that negative interactions have a much stronger effect on relationship satisfaction than positive ones, leading to the conclusion that it takes several positive interactions to outweigh a single negative one. In studies of impression formation, a single piece of negative information about a person overshadows several pieces of positive information. The bad simply looms larger than the good. Have you ever received a page of praise and one line of criticism? and found yourself unable to stop thinking about the single criticism. Or notice that one rude encounter can ruin an otherwise wonderful day, while a kind gesture rarely erases a bad one. Think about how a relationship can be poisoned by a pattern of small negative moments, even when there are many good ones, because the negative ones carry so much more weight. You can use awareness of the negativity bias to manage impressions and relationships wisely. Because negative moments count for so much more, it is worth going to great lengths to avoid creating them and to repair them quickly when they occur. A single harsh word, broken promise, or careless slight can undo a great deal of goodwill, so guarding against unnecessary negativity protects your relationships and reputation. The negativity bias also means you must consciously create an abundance of positive interactions to maintain healthy relationships, since it takes many good moments to balance one bad. And in managing your own mind, recognizing this bias helps you resist the pull to dwell on criticism and setbacks. By understanding that your brain naturally overweights the negative, you can deliberately give proper weight to the positive, both in how you treat others and in how you interpret your own life. This awareness makes you kinder, more careful, and more resilient. The power of pre-commitment and binding yourself. Pre-commitment is the strategy of binding your future self to a course of action in advance, removing or reducing your ability to give in to temptation later. Because we know that our future selves will face moments of weakness, we can act now, while our resolve is strong, to make the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder or impossible. It is the art of tying yourself to the mast before the sirens sing. The idea comes from the ancient story of a sailor who, wishing to hear the irresistible song of the sirens without steering his ship to ruin, had himself bound to the mast so he could not act on his temptation. Modern research on self-control confirms the wisdom of this approach. Studies show that people who set up commitment devices, such as putting money at stake or removing temptations from their environment in advance, succeed far more often at their goals than those who rely on willpower alone in the heated moment. Have you ever left your credit card at home so you would not overspend, or given a friend your phone so you could focus, knowing your in the moment self could not be trusted? Or set up an automatic transfer to savings so the money was gone before you could spend it? Think about how much easier it is to resist temptation by simply not having it within reach than by fighting it directly every time it appears. You can use pre-commitment to achieve goals that raw willpower cannot. Instead of relying on being strong in every difficult moment, design your environment and your commitments in advance so that the right choice becomes the easy one. Remove temptations before they tempt you. Make public commitments that raise the cost of quitting. Automate good behaviors so they happen without a daily battle of will. This strategy works because it respects the reality that willpower is limited and that our future selves will face pressures our present selves cannot fully anticipate. Rather than fighting the same battle over and over, you win it once, in advance, by arranging things so that the battle need not be fought at all. The people who achieve the most are often not those with superhuman willpower, but those who are wise enough to bind their future selves through smart pre-commitment, making success the path of least resistance. The reactance principle and preserving freedom. Psychological reactance is the powerful, often uncomfortable reaction we feel when we sense that our freedom to choose is being threatened or taken away. When someone pushes us too hard, orders us around, or tries to eliminate our options, we tend to resist, sometimes doing the very opposite of what is demanded. purely to reassert our sense of autonomy. We are wired to protect our freedom fiercely. Researchers demonstrated reactance in many settings. In one study, when a rule was posted forbidding a certain behavior in a strongly controlling way, people were far more likely to break it than when the same behavior was discouraged gently. Making something forbidden or scarce increased its appeal precisely because the restriction threatened freedom. The harder people were pushed, the harder they pushed back, even against their own interests, to preserve their sense of control. Have you ever wanted something more the moment you were told you could not have it? Or felt an instinctive urge to resist advice, even good advice, when it was delivered as a command rather than a suggestion? Think about how a teenager rebels against strict control, or how a customer bristles at a pushy salesperson, or how you yourself dig in when someone tries to force your hand, even when part of you agrees with them. You can use the reactance principle by preserving people's sense of freedom whenever you want to influence them. Instead of pushing, commanding, or cornering, emphasize that the choice is theirs. Phrases that affirm autonomy, such as reminding people that it is entirely up to them, actually make them more open to persuasion, because you are removing the threat to their freedom that would otherwise trigger resistance. You should also recognize reactance in yourself so that you do not make poor choices merely to prove that no one can control you. The urge to resist can be so strong that we sometimes act against our own interests just to feel free. By noticing this impulse, you can pause and ask whether you actually want the thing you are resisting or embracing, or whether you are simply reacting to a perceived threat to your autonomy. Respecting freedom, both in others and in your own reactions, is the key to working with this powerful principle rather than being ruled by it. The peak of curiosity and the information gap. Curiosity can be understood as the feeling that arises when we become aware of a gap in our knowledge, a space between what we know and what we want to know. This information gap creates a kind of mental itch, an uncomfortable but compelling desire to close the gap and find out the answer. Understanding how to open these gaps gives you the power to capture and hold attention almost irresistibly. Researchers who studied curiosity proposed that it is driven by these gaps in our knowledge. When we are made aware that there is something we do not know, especially something that feels almost within reach, we experience a strong pull to resolve the uncertainty. Studies of the brain suggest that curiosity engages the same circuits involved in anticipation and reward, meaning that the promise of closing a knowledge gap is genuinely, physically motivating. The gap itself creates the hunger. Have you ever been unable to resist clicking on a headline that hinted at an answer without giving it away? Or reading on late into the night because a story posed a question you desperately needed resolved? Or found that a teacher who opened a lesson with an intriguing puzzle held your attention far better than one who simply began reciting facts? Think about how a question left hanging can occupy your mind far more powerfully than any statement of fact. You can use the information gap to make anything you communicate more engaging. Rather than leading with your conclusion, open a gap first by posing an intriguing question or hinting at a surprising answer to come. This creates curiosity that pulls people in and makes them want to hear what you have to say. A well-placed question or a promise of a revelation transforms passive listeners into eager ones. You can also use curiosity to fuel your own learning and growth. When you deliberately identify the gaps in your knowledge and frame them as intriguing questions, you tap into the natural motivating power of curiosity, making learning feel less like a chore and more like the satisfying pursuit of answers. The mind is drawn irresistibly toward the resolution of uncertainty, and by learning to open and close these gaps skillfully, you can capture attention, drive engagement, and keep your own hunger for knowledge alive. The power of distanced self-talk. Distanced self-talk is the technique of coaching yourself through difficult moments using your own name or the word you rather than the word I. This small linguistic shift creates psychological distance from your immediate emotions, allowing you to advise yourself with the calm wisdom you would offer a friend, rather than drowning in the first-person intensity of your own feelings. Talking to yourself by name turns you into your own coach. Researchers studying self-talk found that people who reflected on stressful situations using their own name, asking questions like, "Why is Sarah feeling this way?" rather than "Why am I feeling this way?" showed measurably calmer responses. In studies involving stressful tasks such as public speaking, those who used distanced self-talk experienced less anxiety, performed better, and ruminated less afterward, compared to those who used first-person self-talk. Brain measurements suggested that this shift reduced emotional reactivity remarkably quickly, with the simple change of pronoun creating real emotional regulation with almost no effort. Have you ever noticed that you can give brilliantly wise, calm advice to a friend in crisis, yet find yourself helpless and overwhelmed when facing the very same problem yourself? Or caught yourself muttering your own name in frustration, saying, "Come on, you know better than this," and felt a strange, steadying effect? Think about how much clearer every problem looks from the outside, and imagine being able to step outside your own storms at will. You can use distanced self-talk whenever emotions threaten to overwhelm your judgment. In moments of anxiety, anger, or self-doubt, address yourself by name or as you, and coach yourself as you would coach someone you care about. Before a stressful event, tell yourself by name that you have prepared for this and know what to do. In the grip of worry, ask what advice you would give a friend in this exact situation, and then give that advice to yourself. The power of this technique lies in the perspective shift it creates. The problems that overwhelm us up close become manageable when viewed from even a small distance, and language is the fastest tool we have for creating that distance. By becoming your own advisor rather than your own prisoner, you gain access, in your hardest moments, to the same wisdom, calm, and clarity you have always had for everyone else. The person who masters this simple shift carries a steady coach with them everywhere they go, one who knows them perfectly and is available at a moment's notice, free of charge, for life. The power of perceived progress and the goal gradient. The goal gradient effect describes how our motivation and effort increase as we get closer to a goal. The nearer we are to completion, the harder we push and the more energized we feel. Momentum builds as the finish line approaches, and understanding this can help you design goals and tasks that carry you forward on a rising tide of motivation. Researchers demonstrated this with a clever study involving coffee shop loyalty cards. One group received a card requiring 10 stamps, starting from 0. Another received a card requiring 12 stamps, but arriving with 2 already filled in. Both groups needed 10 more purchases, but the second group, which felt they had already made progress toward the goal, completed the card faster. The illusion of progress already made ignited greater motivation, and people accelerated as they neared the reward. Have you ever felt a surge of energy in the final stretch of a long task, working faster and more intensely as the end came into view? Or noticed how a progress bar that is nearly full pulls you to finish, while one barely started feels discouraging? Think about how much more motivated you feel to complete something when you can see the end approaching. compared to the sluggish reluctance of just beginning. You can use the goal gradient effect to boost your own motivation and that of others. When starting a goal, find ways to establish a sense of progress already made, so that you begin feeling partway there rather than at zero. Breaking large goals into stages and celebrating early progress keeps the finish line feeling reachable and the motivation high. You can also design experiences for others that harness this effect. Showing people how far they have already come, rather than only how far they have to go, taps into the accelerating power of the goal gradient. Highlighting progress, marking milestones, and creating a felt sense of nearing completion pulls people forward. Because motivation naturally rises as goals approach, the skill lies in structuring efforts so that the sense of nearness and progress is present as often as possible, turning the long, discouraging middle of any journey into a series of nearing finish lines. The illusory truth effect and the power of repetition. The illusory truth effect is the tendency to believe information simply because we have encountered it repeatedly. The more often we hear a statement, the more true it feels, regardless of whether it actually is true. Repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity is mistaken by the mind for truth. This effect operates quietly and powerfully, shaping beliefs through sheer frequency of exposure. Researchers demonstrated this by exposing people to a series of statements, some true and some false, and then later asking them to judge the truth of various statements, including some they had seen before. The statements people had encountered earlier were rated as more likely to be true, simply because they felt familiar. Strikingly, this happened even with statements people might have known to be false, and even when they could not recall having seen them before. The mere sense of familiarity nudged them toward belief. Have you ever come to accept a claim as true simply because you kept hearing it from many directions, even without ever seeing real evidence? Or noticed that a slogan or idea repeated often enough begins to feel obviously correct, as though its truth were self-evident? Think about how repeated exposure to a message, through advertising, conversation, or media, can gradually shift what feels true to you without any new facts being presented. You can use the illusory truth effect ethically by repeating your genuine, important messages consistently, since a truth stated once is easily forgotten, while a truth repeated regularly takes root. If you have something true and valuable to communicate, do not assume that saying it once is enough. Reinforce it through repetition, so that it gains the weight and familiarity that make it stick. More importantly, you must protect yourself and others from the darker side of this effect. Because repetition can make even false claims feel true, you should be cautious about accepting things merely because you have heard them often. When you notice a belief that feels obviously true, ask whether it is supported by real evidence or merely by frequent repetition. This awareness is a crucial defense in a world full of repeated messages competing to shape your beliefs. By understanding that familiarity is not truth, you can hold your beliefs to a higher standard than mere frequency of exposure and think far more clearly than those who mistake what they have heard often for what is actually so. The power of naming emotions and affect labeling. Affect labeling is the simple but powerful act of putting feelings into words, which reduces their intensity and helps us regain control over them. When we name an emotion, whether our own or someone else's, the very act of labeling it seems to take some of the heat out of it, calming the emotional storm and restoring the capacity for clear thought. Naming a feeling, it turns out, tames it. Researchers studied this by observing what happens in the brain when people label their emotions. When participants viewed emotionally charged images and put their feelings into words, activity in the brain's emotional alarm centers decreased, while the more reflective, regulating regions became more active. Simply naming the feeling, saying that something made them anxious or angry, dampened the emotional reaction. The words acted as a kind of brake on the runaway feeling. Have you ever felt a wave of anxiety or anger ease slightly the moment you admitted to yourself exactly what you were feeling and why? Or noticed that when a friend accurately names what you are going through, saying it sounds like you are really frustrated, you feel instantly calmer and more understood? Think about how a confusing swirl of emotion becomes more manageable the moment it is given a clear name, as though naming it turns a formless threat into something you can face. You can use affect labeling to manage your own emotions in difficult moments. When you feel overwhelmed, pause and name precisely what you are feeling, in words. This simple practice engages your reflective mind, quiets your emotional alarm, and helps you respond thoughtfully rather than react blindly. The act of naming creates a small but crucial space between you and your feeling. You can also use it to calm and connect with others. When someone is upset, accurately naming their emotion, gently and without judgment, helps them feel understood and actually reduces the intensity of what they are feeling. Rather than telling an upset person to calm down, which rarely works, acknowledging that they seem really hurt or frustrated soothes them far more effectively. This skill of labeling emotions, in yourself and others, is one of the most practical tools for diffusing tension, building connection, and keeping a clear head when feelings run high. The contrast of rejection. Then retreat in reverse. There is a subtle but effective sequence in which you make yourself more persuasive by first appearing to consider the other person's constraints and then adjusting toward them, creating a powerful sense of flexibility and fairness. When people perceive that you have moved in their direction, made a concession, or adapted your position to accommodate them, they feel a strong pull to reciprocate and meet you part way. Perceived flexibility invites cooperation. This connects to research on how concessions shape negotiation and cooperation. When one party visibly gives ground, the other party feels obligated to give ground in return, and the interaction moves toward agreement. Studies of bargaining show that a well-timed concession, especially one that appears to cost the giver something, dramatically increases the likelihood that the other side will offer a concession of their own. The movement itself, the visible act of adjusting, triggers the pull toward mutual accommodation. Have you ever felt won over by someone who listened to your concerns and then visibly softened their position, moving toward you, and found yourself suddenly eager to meet them halfway? Or notice that a person who insists rigidly on their original position provokes resistance, while one who shows willingness to adapt invites you to be reasonable in return? Think about how a small, genuine gesture of flexibility can transform a tense standoff into a warm collaboration. You can use this principle by demonstrating genuine flexibility and willingness to accommodate others when you seek agreement. Rather than clinging rigidly to a fixed position, showing that you have heard the other person and are willing to adjust makes them far more open to adjusting in return. The perception that you have moved toward them creates a powerful sense of obligation to move toward you. The key is that this must be authentic, not a manipulative theatre of fake concessions. People sense insincerity, and hollow gestures of flexibility breed distrust rather than cooperation. But when you genuinely listen, genuinely consider the other person's needs, and genuinely adjust where you reasonably can, you create the conditions for real agreement. In a world where so many people dig in and refuse to budge, the willingness to move first, to show good faith through visible flexibility, is often what unlocks cooperation and turns adversaries into partners. The power of the unexpected reward. Unpredictable rewards have a far stronger grip on behavior than predictable ones. When a reward comes reliably every time, we quickly take it for granted. But when a reward comes unpredictably, sometimes yes and sometimes no, it becomes strangely compelling, driving persistent, even compulsive behavior. The uncertainty itself heightens the pull, which is why intermittent rewards are among the most powerful shapers of behavior known to psychology. Researchers established this through studies of how patterns of reward affect behavior. When rewards were given every single time, behavior was steady but easily extinguished once the reward stopped. But when rewards were given unpredictably, on some occasions and not others, the behavior became remarkably persistent and resistant to fading. This intermittent pattern is the same mechanism that makes gambling so gripping, as the uncertain possibility of a reward keeps people pulling the lever long past the point of reason. Have you ever found yourself checking your phone compulsively, drawn back again and again by the unpredictable arrival of an interesting message or notification? Or notice that a friend who is warm and appreciative only sometimes, unpredictably, holds your attention more than one who praises you constantly? Think about how the uncertain, occasional payoff of many activities keeps us engaged far longer than any reliable, predictable reward ever could. You can use awareness of intermittent reinforcement in ethical, constructive ways, and to protect yourself from its darker pull. In recognizing your own behavior, understanding this principle helps you see why certain apps, games, and habits grip you so tightly, and why they are deliberately designed around unpredictable rewards. This awareness lets you take back control from products engineered to exploit this vulnerability. In motivating yourself and others positively, you can introduce healthy variety and occasional surprise rather than dull, predictable routine, keeping engagement and enthusiasm alive. Surprising a team with unexpected recognition, or varying your own rewards for good habits, keeps motivation fresher than a rigidly predictable system. But the deeper lesson is one of self-protection. Because unpredictable rewards can drive compulsive behavior against our own interests. Recognizing when you are caught in such a loop, whether with a device, a person, or a habit, is the first step to freeing yourself. Understanding the power of the unexpected reward lets you harness it for good and defend against its misuse. The similarity attraction principle. We are powerfully drawn to people who are similar to us. Shared attitudes, values, backgrounds, interests, and even superficial similarities like names, birthdays, or mannerisms make us like and trust others more. Similarity breeds liking, and liking breeds cooperation, which makes the discovery and gentle emphasis of common ground one of the most reliable paths to connection. Researchers have demonstrated the similarity attraction effect across a wide range of studies. People consistently prefer, trust, and cooperate with those who resemble them, whether in deep values or trivial coincidences. In some studies, people were more likely to help or comply with someone who shared their name, their birthday, or even a similar sounding response, purely because of the sense of kinship these small similarities created. We feel an instinctive warmth toward those who seem to be like us. Have you ever felt an immediate bond with a stranger upon discovering you came from the same town, supported the same team, or shared an unusual interest? Or noticed how quickly a conversation warms when you stumble on something you have in common? Think about how much easier it is to trust and like someone once you realize they see the world, or some corner of it, the way you do. You can use the similarity attraction principle by genuinely seeking and highlighting common ground with the people you meet. When you take the time to discover shared interests, values, experiences, or backgrounds, and to acknowledge them warmly, you build a natural bridge of connection. This is not about pretending to be something you are not, but about finding the real points of overlap that exist between almost any two people. The emphasis on authenticity matters greatly. Manufacturing false similarities to manipulate people is both unethical and, in the long run, ineffective, because pretense tends to unravel. But almost everyone shares some genuine common ground, and the skill lies in curiosity, in asking questions, and listening well enough to discover it. When you approach others with genuine interest in finding what connects you, rather than what divides you, you tap into one of the deepest sources of human liking. In a world that often emphasizes differences, the person who can find and honor real similarity holds a powerful key to friendship, trust, and influence. The power of silence after asking. There is a specific and highly effective use of silence that comes right after you ask a question or make a request. Once you have asked, saying nothing more and simply waiting, allowing the silence to stretch, creates a subtle pressure that draws out honest answers, thoughtful responses, and often agreement. Most people rush to fill silence, and by resisting that urge, you gain enormous power in any conversation or negotiation. While the broader art of silence involves many uses, this particular technique is grounded in the observation that silence creates a vacuum that people feel compelled to fill. Studies of negotiation and interviewing consistently find that those who can tolerate silence after asking a question extract more information and more concessions than those who nervously keep talking. The person who speaks next after a pause is often the one who gives ground, reveals more, or talks themselves into agreement. Have you ever asked someone a question, then waited quietly, and watched them fill the silence with far more than they intended to say, sometimes revealing exactly what you needed to know? Or felt the almost unbearable pull to keep talking when a conversation went quiet, rushing to explain or soften your request? Think about how a skilled interviewer or negotiator lets a silence linger, and how that quiet space seems to pull words and concessions out of the other person. You can use silence after asking by training yourself to stop talking once you have posed a question or made a request, and to simply wait, calmly and comfortably. Resist the powerful urge to fill the quiet, to soften your ask, or to rescue the other person from the pause. That silence does your work for you, drawing out their true response and often their agreement. This requires practice and composure, because the discomfort of silence tempts almost everyone to break it. But the person who can remain calm and patient in the quiet holds a distinct advantage. By asking clearly and then falling silent, you give the other person the space to think, to feel the gentle pressure of the pause, and to respond more fully and honestly than they otherwise would. In negotiations, interviews, sales, and difficult conversations, the disciplined use of silence after asking is one of the simplest and most powerful techniques available, costing nothing but the willingness to be comfortable in the quiet. The bias of the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to explain other people's behavior in terms of their character, while explaining our own behavior in terms of our circumstances. When someone else makes a mistake, we assume it reflects who they are, that they are careless, rude, or incompetent. When we make the same mistake, we point to the situation, the traffic, the pressure, the bad day. This double standard distorts our judgments and damages our relationships. Research has demonstrated this bias in many ways. In one study, participants observed a person reading a speech and were told the person had been assigned which position to argue. Even knowing the position was assigned, observers still assumed the speech reflected the person's true beliefs. We leap to explain behavior through character, discounting the powerful role of circumstance, even when the circumstance is staring us in the face. Have you ever silently judged a driver who cut you off as a selfish jerk while excusing your own identical maneuver as a necessary response to being late? Or assumed a curt colleague was simply rude without considering that they might be under crushing pressure at home? Think about how quick we are to condemn others for the very things we forgive in ourselves, seeing their flaws as fixed traits and our own as understandable reactions to circumstance. You can use awareness of the fundamental attribution error to become far wiser and more compassionate in how you judge people. When someone behaves badly, pause before concluding it reflects their character and consider what situation might be driving their behavior. This charitable interpretation not only tends to be more accurate, but also makes you calmer, kinder, and easier to get along with. This awareness also improves your relationships and influence enormously. People feel the difference between being judged harshly and being understood, and those who extend the benefit of the doubt earn deep loyalty and goodwill. Moreover, understanding this bias helps you present your own actions more effectively, since you can recognize that others will tend to judge your behavior by your character. By giving people the same situational grace you naturally give yourself, and by remembering that everyone is fighting battles you cannot see, you become both a fairer judge and a more beloved presence in the lives of those around you. The power of deliberate practice and growth. The way we understand our own abilities profoundly shapes what we become. People who believe their abilities are fixed traits tend to avoid challenges and give up easily, while people who believe their abilities can grow through effort, embrace challenges, persist through difficulty, and ultimately achieve far more. This difference in mindset, and the practice habits it produces, is one of the great determinants of success in any field. Researchers studying achievement found that how people view their abilities dramatically affects their behavior and results. Those with a growth-oriented view, who see ability as something that develops through effort and practice, respond to setbacks with renewed effort and learning. Those with a fixed view, who see ability as innate and unchangeable, tend to interpret failure as proof of their limits and to withdraw. Studies of expert performers further reveal that excellence comes not from raw talent alone, but from sustained, focused, deliberate practice over long periods. Have you ever avoided trying something because you assumed you simply were not the type of person who could do it, treating your current ability as a fixed ceiling? Or watched someone of ordinary talent surpass gifted peers through sheer persistent effort and refusal to quit? Think about how the belief that you can improve, that ability is built rather than born, changes everything about how you face a challenge. You can use this understanding to transform your own approach to growth. Embrace the belief that your abilities are not fixed, but can be developed through effort and smart practice. When you face difficulty, interpret it as a sign that you are stretching and learning rather than proof of your limits. Seek out challenges, welcome mistakes as information, and persist, knowing that struggle is the path to mastery rather than evidence of inadequacy. You can also use this to bring out growth in others. Praising people for their effort, strategy, and persistence, rather than for fixed traits like being smart or talented, encourages a growth mindset and greater resilience. Framing abilities as developable helps people take on challenges they would otherwise avoid. Combined with the principle of deliberate practice, which holds that focused effort on the edge of your ability drives improvement, this mindset becomes a powerful engine of achievement. The people who accomplish the most are rarely those who started with the most talent, but those who believed they could grow and were willing to do the hard, focused work of growing. The decoy effect and guiding choices. The decoy effect is a fascinating quirk of decision-making in which introducing a third, less attractive option changes how people choose between two others. By adding a decoy that is clearly worse than one option but not the other, you can steer people toward the option you want, because the decoy makes that option look especially good by comparison. The mere presence of an inferior alternative reshapes the entire choice. Researchers demonstrated this with a now famous example involving subscription pricing. When people were offered a cheap digital-only option and an expensive print and digital option, they split their choices. But when a third option was added, a print-only option priced the same as the print and digital bundle, almost everyone chose the bundle. The print-only decoy, which no rational person would pick, made the bundle look like an obvious bargain, shifting the whole pattern of choice. Have you ever chosen the medium or large size because it seemed like far better value next to a strangely overpriced small, only to realize the pricing had been arranged to nudge you exactly there, or found that adding a clearly inferior option to a comparison suddenly made one of the others feel like the obvious smart choice? Think about how the options presented alongside a choice, even ones you would never pick, quietly shape which option feels right. You can use awareness of the decoy effect to understand how choices are being shaped for you and to make cleaner decisions. When you notice that one option seems obviously superior because a nearby option is clearly worse, pause and evaluate each choice on its own merits rather than by comparison. Recognizing when a decoy has been placed to steer you protects you from being subtly manipulated. Used ethically, you can also apply this understanding when presenting options to others, arranging genuine choices in ways that make the best option, the one truly in their interest, stand out clearly. The line between helpful clarity and manipulation lies in whether you are guiding people toward what genuinely serves them or exploiting the effect to push them toward what serves only you. By understanding how the presence and arrangement of options shapes decisions, you can both defend your own choices from manipulation and present options to others with honesty and clarity, helping them see the real value in what you offer. The power of implementation intentions. Implementation intentions are specific, if then plans that dramatically increase the likelihood of following through on our goals. Rather than merely intending to do something, we specify exactly when, where, and how we will do it, linking a specific situation to a specific action. This simple act of concrete planning bridges the gap between intention and behavior that so often defeats our good intentions. Researchers demonstrated the power of implementation intentions across many studies. People who formed vague intentions to pursue a goal often fail to act, while those who formed specific if-then plans, deciding exactly when and where they would take action, followed through at far higher rates. In one study on exercise, simply asking people to specify precisely when and where they would work out roughly doubled the number who actually did. The concrete plan turned a fragile wish into a reliable behavior. Have you ever set a goal with genuine determination, only to let it slip because you never decided exactly when and how you would act on it? Or notice that the tasks you scheduled precisely at a specific time and place got done, while the ones you vaguely meant to do somehow never happened? Think about how a plan to exercise more remains an empty wish until it becomes a decision to run at a specific time on specific days, which suddenly makes it real. You can use implementation intentions to close the gap between what you intend and what you actually do. Whenever you set a goal, translate it immediately into a specific if-then plan, deciding exactly when, where, and how you will act. Instead of intending to eat better, decide that when you sit down for lunch, you will start with vegetables. This concrete linking of situation to action makes follow-through far more automatic. The power of this technique lies in removing the need to decide in the moment, when willpower and clarity often fail. By deciding in advance exactly what you will do and when, you create a mental trigger that fires automatically when the situation arises, carrying you into action before hesitation or temptation can intervene. This simple shift from vague intention to specific plan is one of the most reliable and well-supported tools for achieving goals. The difference between those who follow through and those who do not is often nothing more than whether they planned the concrete details in advance. The warmth and competence dimensions of impression. When we form impressions of other people, we evaluate them along two fundamental dimensions: warmth and competence. Warmth captures whether a person seems friendly, trustworthy, and well-intentioned, while competence captures whether they seem capable, skilled, and effective. Nearly all our judgments of others boil down to these two questions, and understanding them lets you shape how you are perceived far more deliberately. Research has established that warmth and competence account for the vast majority of how we judge people. We first assess warmth because knowing whether someone means us well or ill has always been more urgent for survival, and then we assess competence because it tells us whether they can act on their intentions. The most admired people are seen as high in both, warm and capable, while those low in both are dismissed, and those high in one but low in the other evoke mixed feelings. Have you ever met someone highly skilled who left you cold because they seemed arrogant and uncaring, or someone lovely and warm whom you could not quite take seriously because they seemed incapable? Or noticed that the people you most respect and trust manage to come across as both genuinely kind and genuinely competent? Think about how a leader who is only competent inspires fear rather than loyalty, while one who is only warm inspires affection but not confidence. You can use the warmth and competence framework to present yourself more effectively in any situation. Recognize that people are unconsciously evaluating you on both dimensions, and aim to convey both genuine warmth and genuine competence. Demonstrating skill and capability without warmth makes you respected but unliked, while radiating warmth without competence makes you liked but not trusted with important things. The goal is to embody both. The order matters too, since people assess warmth first. Leading with warmth, showing that you are friendly and well-intentioned, opens people to then appreciating your competence. Competence displayed before warmth can come across as cold or threatening. By establishing warmth first and then demonstrating capability, you create the most powerful and trusted impression. Understanding that all impressions run along these two dimensions gives you a clear map for how to present yourself, how to read others, and how to become the kind of person others both like and rely upon, which is the foundation of lasting influence. The power of small wins and momentum. Small wins are minor but meaningful accomplishments that create a sense of progress and momentum, and their psychological power far exceeds their objective size. Each small victory generates positive emotion, builds confidence, and fuels the motivation to keep going, creating an upward spiral of progress. Understanding the outsized impact of small wins lets you build momentum toward large goals that would otherwise feel overwhelming. Researchers studying motivation and progress found that of all the things that boost people's engagement and drive, the single most powerful is the sense of making progress in meaningful work. Even small steps forward produce significant lifts in mood, motivation, and creativity. The daily experience of progress, however modest, turned out to be more energizing than recognition, incentives, or grand achievements. Momentum, built from small wins, proved to be the engine of sustained effort. Have you ever felt discouraged by a huge, distant goal, then found your energy and hope restored the moment you completed one small piece of it? Or noticed how crossing even a minor item off a list gives a small jolt of satisfaction that makes the next task easier? Think about how a long journey feels impossible when you stare at the whole distance, but becomes manageable and even energizing when you focus on completing one small stretch at a time. You can use the power of small wins to sustain your motivation through long and difficult endeavors. Break large goals into small, achievable steps and deliberately notice and celebrate each one you complete. This creates a steady stream of the progress that fuels motivation, transforming an overwhelming mountain into a series of manageable, momentum-building steps. The key is to make progress visible and to honor it, however small. You can also use this to motivate and lead others. Helping people experience frequent small wins and acknowledging their progress along the way keeps them engaged and driven far better than dangling only a distant final reward. By structuring work so that people regularly taste the satisfaction of progress, you tap into the most powerful motivator there is. The secret to accomplishing great things is rarely a single heroic burst of effort, but rather the patient accumulation of small wins, each one building the confidence and momentum that carries you to the next, until the sum of many small victories becomes a large one. The spotlight of attention and where you point it. Where we direct our attention shapes our entire experience of reality, because we can only consciously perceive and think about a tiny fraction of everything available to us at any moment. Attention acts like a spotlight, illuminating whatever we point it at while leaving everything else in darkness. Mastering the direction of your attention and influencing where others point theirs is one of the most fundamental forms of power over experience. Research on attention has repeatedly shown how selective and limited it is. In famous demonstrations, people focused on one task failed to notice striking events happening right in front of them, because their attention was directed elsewhere. What we attend to becomes our reality, and what we ignore effectively does not exist for us in the moment. This means that the quality of our lives depends heavily on the habitual direction of our attention, on what we choose to notice and dwell upon. Have you ever noticed that on days you look for things to be grateful for, the world seems full of them, while on days you look for problems, problems seem to multiply? Or found that once you decided to focus on a goal, opportunities related to it seem to appear everywhere, though they had been there all along? Think about how two people can live through the same event and experience it completely differently, based purely on what each one chose to focus on. You can use the power of attention to transform your own experience and effectiveness. by deliberately directing your attention toward what is useful, positive, and within your control, rather than letting it drift toward worry, comparison, or things you cannot change. You literally shape the reality you live in. Training yourself to notice opportunities, progress, and good in your life makes that your dominant experience. You can also influence where others point their attention, which shapes their experience and decisions. Whatever you draw people's attention toward becomes more prominent and important in their minds. Used ethically, this means helping people focus on solutions rather than problems, on possibilities rather than limitations, on what unites rather than what divides. Because attention is the gateway through which all experience passes, the ability to direct it in yourself and gently in others is among the most fundamental of all psychological skills, quietly determining what your life and the lives of those around you will be about. The power of the question that assumes yes. There is a subtle art in how we phrase questions and requests, and one of the most effective techniques is to frame a question in a way that gently assumes the desired answer or outcome. Rather than asking whether someone wants to do something, which invites a yes or no and often a no, you can ask a question that presupposes their participation and merely asks about the details. This assumptive framing quietly guides people toward agreement by making the yes feel already settled. This technique draws on research into how the framing of questions shapes responses. Questions that presuppose a positive outcome and focus attention on secondary details tend to produce far more agreement than questions that put the fundamental yes or no in play. When you ask which option someone prefers, rather than whether they want any option at all, you have shifted the conversation past the question of participation and on to the question of how, which dramatically increases the likelihood of a positive outcome. Have you ever noticed how a skilled server asks not whether you want dessert, but which dessert you would like, and how much harder it becomes to decline? Or found yourself agreeing to something because the question was framed around the details of doing it, rather than whether to do it at all? Think about how being asked whether Tuesday or Thursday works better quietly assumes that you will meet, moving you past the decision of whether to meet at all. You can use the assumptive question by framing your requests and invitations in ways that presuppose a positive outcome and focus on the details. Instead of asking whether someone would like to work together, ask when they would like to start. Instead of asking whether they want to help, ask which part they would prefer to take on. This gentle assumption of agreement guides people toward yes, while still leaving them free to decline if they truly wish. The ethical line here matters, since this technique should be used to smooth the path toward outcomes that genuinely serve both parties, not to trick people into things against their interest. When the underlying offer is good and mutual, assumptive framing simply removes unnecessary friction and hesitation, helping people move forward on something they would benefit from anyway. But used manipulatively, to steamroll people past their own reservations, it breeds resentment and distrust. Applied with integrity, the assumptive question is a graceful way to guide willing people past needless hesitation and toward decisions that serve them well. The principle of commitment through small steps. People become committed to a path through the accumulation of small steps, and each small action we take makes us more likely to take the next, larger one in the same direction. Once we begin moving down a path, however tentatively, we develop a momentum and a sense of identity that pulls us onward. Understanding how commitment builds through small steps lets you start meaningful changes that snowball into large transformations. This principle draws on research showing that small initial actions shape our self-image and subsequent behavior. When people take a small step, such as agreeing to a minor request or beginning a modest version of a behavior, they begin to see themselves as the kind of person who does such things, and this new self-image drives them to act consistently with it. Studies show that those who take a small first step become far more likely to take larger steps later, as the small commitment reshapes their identity and momentum. Have you ever started a new habit in the smallest possible way and found that the tiny beginning gradually grew into a substantial part of your life? Or noticed that once you took the first small step toward a goal, continuing felt natural, while the hardest part had been simply beginning? Think about how a great change in a person's life often traces back to one small decision, one first step, that set a direction and then gathered momentum over time. You can use the principle of small steps to create lasting change in yourself. When you want to build a new habit or pursue a large goal, begin with a step so small it feels almost too easy, so small you cannot fail. This tiny beginning establishes momentum and reshapes your self-image, making the next step easier and the next, until the small beginning has grown into a substantial change. The secret is to lower the barrier to starting as much as possible. You can also use this to help others change and to build cooperation. Inviting people to take a small first step towards something, rather than demanding a large commitment up front, works far better, because the small step opens the door to larger ones. Great journeys and great changes almost always begin with a single small step, and the person who understands how commitment builds through these small steps holds the key to starting changes that once seemed impossible. Do not despise small beginnings, for they are the seeds from which large transformations grow. The art of the genuine apology and repair. The ability to apologize well and repair ruptures in relationships is one of the most underappreciated yet powerful of all social skills. Conflicts and mistakes are inevitable in any relationship, but the difference between relationships that survive and deepen and those that wither often comes down to how well ruptures are repaired. A genuine, well-crafted apology can restore trust, deepen connection, and turn a moment of failure into one of strengthened bonds. Researchers studying apologies and forgiveness have identified the elements that make an apology effective. The most powerful apologies include a clear acknowledgement of the specific wrong, an expression of genuine remorse, an acceptance of responsibility without excuses, and an offer to make amends or change. Studies show that apologies containing these elements are far more likely to be accepted and to restore trust than vague, defensive, or excuse-laden ones. It is not the mere saying of sorry that heals, but the quality and sincerity of the repair. Have you ever received an apology that actually made things worse because it was full of excuses, blamed you, or minimized the harm, and felt no better afterward? Or experienced the profound relief and renewed closeness that comes from a sincere apology that truly acknowledged the hurt and took responsibility? Think about how a relationship can be strengthened rather than damaged by a conflict, when the repair afterward is done with genuine humility and care. You can use the art of the genuine apology to repair and strengthen your relationships. When you have caused harm, offer an apology that clearly acknowledges the specific wrong, expresses sincere remorse, takes full responsibility without excuses or blame shifting, and commits to doing better. Resist the temptation to defend yourself, explain away the harm, or add a but that undoes the apology. A clean, humble, sincere apology has remarkable power to heal. This skill matters enormously because everyone makes mistakes and causes hurt, and the willingness and ability to repair well is what allows relationships to endure and deepen over time. Far from being a sign of weakness, a genuine apology is a sign of strength and security, and it often earns more respect and trust than never erring at all. By mastering the art of sincere repair, you gain the ability to recover from the inevitable ruptures of life, to maintain and deepen your most important relationships, and to model the humility and accountability that draw people to you. The person who can apologize genuinely and repair ruptures gracefully holds one of the truest keys to lasting connection. The power of reframing problems as opportunities. The way we frame a situation in our own minds, as a threat or a challenge, as a problem or an opportunity, profoundly shapes our emotional response, our physiology, and our performance. The same objective circumstance can be experienced as a crushing burden or an exciting challenge depending entirely on how we frame it. And learning to reframe difficulties as opportunities is one of the most powerful mental skills for thriving under pressure and adversity. Researchers studying stress have found that whether people appraise a demanding situation as a threat or a challenge, changes their bodies as well as their minds. When people view a stressful situation as a challenge they can rise to, their physiology shifts toward a state that supports strong performance, with the cardiovascular system responding in a healthier, more efficient way. When they view the same situation as a threat, their physiology shifts toward a defensive, less effective state. The reframing is not mere positive thinking, but a genuine change in how the body and mind respond. Have you ever faced a daunting situation, then felt everything shift when you decided to treat it as an exciting challenge rather than a threat, finding energy and focus where there had been only dread? Or noticed how two people can face the same hardship, one crushed by it, and the other invigorated, based purely on how each frames it in their mind? Think about how the story you tell yourself about a difficulty, whether it is happening to you or for you, changes everything about how you experience and handle it. You can use reframing to transform how you respond to difficulty. When you face a stressful or challenging situation, consciously choose to frame it as a challenge to rise to, an opportunity to grow, or a problem you have the resources to solve, rather than a threat that might overwhelm you. This is not denial of real difficulty, but a deliberate choice about which true framing to adopt, and it genuinely improves your emotional state, your physiology, and your performance. You can also help others reframe their difficulties, which is a great gift. When someone is overwhelmed by a problem, helping them see it as a challenge they are capable of meeting, or as an opportunity hidden within the hardship, can restore their energy and hope. The most resilient people are not those who face fewer difficulties, but those who have mastered the art of framing difficulties in empowering ways. Since the frame we place on a situation shapes our entire experience of it, learning to reframe problems as opportunities and threats as challenges is one of the truest secrets of resilience, performance, and a life well lived under pressure. The power of asking for advice. Asking someone for advice is one of the most underrated ways to build connection, earn goodwill, and even increase how competent others perceive you to be. When you ask a person for their advice, you flatter them, engage them, and draw them onto your side, all while gaining genuinely useful input. Far from making you look weak or ignorant, asking for advice, done well, makes you more likable and more respected. Researchers found that, contrary to the common fear that seeking advice makes us look incompetent, asking for advice actually tends to increase how competent others perceive us to be. In their studies, people who asked for advice were rated as more capable than those who did not, because seeking advice signals wisdom and engages the other person's ego in a flattering way. Asking for advice also makes the advisor like you more, because it honors their knowledge and invites them to invest in your success. Have you ever felt warmly towards someone who sincerely asked for your opinion or guidance, pleased that they valued your judgment? Or noticed that asking a colleague or mentor for advice not only gave you useful input, but deepened your relationship with them? Think about how being asked for advice makes you feel respected and important, and how it naturally draws you toward the person who asked, making you invested in helping them succeed. You can use the power of asking for advice to build relationships and influence. When you genuinely seek someone's advice, you pay them a sincere compliment, engage their expertise, and invite them to become an ally in your endeavors. This works especially well with people whose support you value, as the act of asking draws them closer and makes them more invested in you. It also gives you the real benefit of their knowledge and perspective. The essential ingredient, once again, is sincerity, since manipulative advice seeking that ignores the response rings hollow and damages trust. But when you truly value someone's perspective and ask for it with genuine openness, you create a virtuous circle. They feel honored and become invested in you. You gain valuable input, and the relationship deepens. In a world where many people are reluctant to ask for help for fear of looking weak, the person who understands that sincere advice seeking builds connection and even enhances respect holds a quiet and powerful advantage. Asking for advice, far from a sign of weakness, is a gift you give another and a bridge you build between you. The power of emotional regulation under pressure. The ability to stay calm and composed under pressure, while others around you lose their heads, is one of the most powerful and rare of all human capacities. When you can regulate your emotions in tense, high-stakes, or chaotic situations, you think more clearly, make better decisions, and project an authority and steadiness that draws people to follow and trust you. Emotional regulation is the quiet foundation beneath all effective action under stress. Research on stress and performance shows that intense emotion, particularly fear and anger, impairs the higher reasoning functions of the brain, narrowing our thinking and pushing us toward impulsive reactions. Studies of leaders, performers, and professionals in high-pressure fields consistently find that those who can manage their emotional arousal, keeping it within a productive range, perform far better than those who are overwhelmed by it. The capacity to remain composed is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to feel intensely while still thinking clearly. Have you ever watched someone stay perfectly calm in a crisis and felt your own panic subside in their presence, instinctively trusting them to lead? Or noticed that when you managed to keep your composure during a stressful moment, you handled it far better than when you let panic or anger take over? Think about how the people we most admire in difficult moments are those who remain steady, whose calm becomes a stabilizing force for everyone around them. You can develop emotional regulation through practice and technique. When you feel intense emotion rising, slowing your breathing, naming what you feel, and deliberately pausing before reacting, all help restore composure and access to clear thinking. Reframing a stressful situation as a challenge to rise to, rather than a threat to fear, also shifts your physiology and mindset toward better performance. These skills can be strengthened over time until calm under pressure becomes your default. The rewards of this capacity are immense. In a crisis, the composed person becomes the natural leader because their steadiness reassures others, and their clear thinking produces better decisions. In conflict, the person who stays calm holds the advantage over the one who loses control. In every high-stakes moment, Emotional regulation is what allows your intelligence, skill, and judgment to function rather than being hijacked by panic or rage. By cultivating the ability to stay composed when it matters most, you gain not only better outcomes, but the deep respect and trust of everyone who witnesses your steadiness in the storm. Calm, it turns out, is a form of power. The power of strategic generosity and the long game. Strategic generosity is the practice of giving freely and helping others without immediate expectation of return. Understanding that genuine generosity, over time, builds a reservoir of goodwill, trust, and relationships that returns to you many times over. While selfish, transactional behavior may win in the short term, those who give generously and build others up tend to succeed more richly over the long run. Generosity, it turns out, is not only virtuous, but wise. Researchers studying patterns of giving and taking in professional life found that, while some generous people are exploited in the short term, the most successful people over the long run are often those who give generously and build others up. Those who consistently help others, share credit, and invest in relationships accumulate deep networks of goodwill and trust that open doors and create opportunities. The takers may win individual exchanges, but the wise givers win the long game, as their generosity returns to them through the many relationships they have nurtured. Have you ever been helped by someone who expected nothing in return and found yourself eager, sometimes years later, to help them in turn? Or noticed that the people with the richest networks and the most opportunities are often those who have quietly helped countless others along the way? Think about how a reputation for generosity and genuine care draws people toward you, while a reputation for selfishness, however clever, eventually closes doors and drains trust. You can use strategic generosity by giving freely and helping others without keeping a tight ledger of immediate returns. When you offer help, share what you know, make introductions, and invest in others' success, you build a store of goodwill and a web of relationships that enriches your life in countless ways. This is not naive self-sacrifice, but a wise recognition that generosity, over time, tends to return to the giver, often from unexpected directions. The key is that the generosity must be genuine, not a calculated transaction in disguise, since people sense the difference between real care and manipulation dressed as kindness. Paradoxically, generosity works best over the long run, precisely when it is not tightly conditioned on return. Those who give from genuine goodwill, while still maintaining healthy boundaries so they are not exploited, tend to build the deepest and most valuable relationships. In a world that often rewards short-term selfishness, the person who understands the long-term power of genuine generosity plays a wiser game, building a life rich in trust, goodwill, and the kind of relationships that make both success and happiness possible. To win in life, in the fullest sense, give more than you take.